What do you do when your wife insists you are paranoid for questioning her old friend, then invites him to your child's birthday party without warning you? How many coincidences can you ignore before the shape of your own family starts to look wrong in every photo? Why did the truth about my daughter's real father arrive not in a fight at home, but in a courthouse lobby, printed in black and white, on a DNA report I did not ask for alone? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Rowan, and if I am honest, the story did not start at the birthday party. It started in smaller moments that were easy to ignore when I wanted to believe everything was fine. At first, it was just a name that came up again, like an old song on a playlist you thought you had deleted. Tessa mentioned that an old friend had messaged her. She said it was funny how life worked, that people you used to know could suddenly appear on your screen again. She told me he was her ex from before we met, someone named Jace, and that it was no big deal. She said they had grown up since then, and were just catching up like normal adults. I told myself it was harmless, because I wanted that to be true. In the evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her phone propped against a mug, fingers moving quickly as she typed. Sometimes she laughed at something she read, and covered her mouth as if she was laughing too loud for the room. When I asked what was so funny, she said it was just an old story that would not make sense to me because I was not there back then. She said I was sweet for being curious, but did not need to worry. I nodded and stirred the pasta or washed dishes, pretending it did not bother me that there was a whole folder of memories she shared with him, and not with me. Liv picked up on the energy without knowing the reasons. She started asking who Jace was, because she heard the name more often. Tessa told her he was a friend from before Liv was born, someone who cared about her because he cared about Tessa. It sounded simple when she said it. One afternoon, a package arrived with no return name, only an address I did not recognize. Tessa opened it in the kitchen while Liv bounced on her toes. Inside was a plush fox with a small card. Tessa read the card first, her face going still for a second before she smiled and showed the toy to Liv. She said that a friend had sent it because he knew Liv liked animals. Later, while Liv was in her room playing, I picked up the card from the counter. It was signed with a name that started with J and ended with a small drawing of a smiley face. Tessa saw me looking and said I should not make it weird, that it was just a kind gift for a child. She said other men would be happy that their daughter got presents and had people who cared about her. I said I was not angry about the gift, only surprised that her ex knew enough about Liv to send something so personal. She answered that she talked about our daughter a lot because she was proud, and it was normal for friends to listen. Her tone made me feel like a scolding child, so I dropped it. That night, after Liv went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I told Tessa I was checking our monthly costs. I opened a new spreadsheet and entered the usual numbers: rent, groceries, utilities, school lunches. Then, in another sheet inside the same file, I wrote a short note with the date and a few words: package for Liv from Jay, plush fox. Tessa said just a friend. It looked silly in the cells, like something from a bad drama, but putting it there calmed me a little. It made the feeling inside my chest move from fog to something with edges. I saved the file and named it with boring letters and numbers, the kind of name no one would bother to open. On the shelf next to the fridge, a binder labeled Household sat between cookbooks. Until then, it had held only bills and service contracts. I pulled it down, added a printed list of our main expenses I kept for myself, and slipped it behind the older papers. The binder felt heavier when I put it back. I did not know why that mattered, only that it did. On the wall above the shelf, our calendar showed the month with neat blue writing. Liv's birthday had a small star drawn next to it, and a note from Tessa about the party Nina wanted to host. A few squares farther, on a date that meant nothing yet, I took a red pen and drew a thin circle. I did not write words, I just left the ring there, like a quiet question. Days passed. Tessa's phone lit up more often, especially in the evenings. Sometimes I walked into the room and saw the screen flash with a message preview that started with J, but she tilted it away before I could read more. She said she was tired of me looking over her shoulder, even when I was not trying to. She said if I trusted her, I would not care who she talked to. I replied that I did trust her, but I also needed to feel included in her life. She shook her head and said I was turning something normal into something ugly. I tried to focus on the quiet good moments with Liv. On Saturdays, we went to the park playground near our building. She ran to the swings and asked me to push her higher. While I pushed, she told me that Jace was funny. I asked how she knew that. She said that sometimes when Tessa video called him, he made faces at her through the screen and guessed her favorite color and the name of her stuffed animals. She said he guessed right every time. My hands kept moving on the swing chain, but my mind slowed down. I told her it sounded like he liked making her laugh. She said he did, and that he seemed to know her very well already. At home, when Liv went to bed, I opened my laptop again. The spreadsheet was waiting. I added another line. Frequent calls with Jay, Liv present, he knows favorites. I saved it and closed it quickly when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The desktop now had 2 small folders I had created earlier that week, named Archive A and Archive B. They were still almost empty, just a few screenshots of social media posts and message previews I had managed to capture before they disappeared. Their presence on the screen made me feel like there was a backup copy of my own memory. One evening, Tessa came home later than usual. She smelled like roasted coffee beans and the sweet, warm scent of a crowded cafe. She said she had stayed out to work on a campaign for a client and had met some people for ideas. I asked casually if Jace was there. She looked annoyed and said he had stopped by for a bit because the cafe was near his gym, but it was not a secret meeting, just a coincidence. She added that if I kept asking about him, I would push her away. I stayed quiet after that. Before bed, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the wall calendar again. Liv's birthday star shone from its square. The red ring around the later date seemed darker in the dim light. I touched the edge of the circle with my finger and wondered what I thought I would be ready for by then. Then I turned off the kitchen light and walked toward the bedroom. Inside the room, Tessa lay on her side with her back to me, her phone screen bright in the dark. I changed quietly, slid under the blanket, and left a respectful space between us. The only sounds were the muffled cars outside and the soft tapping of her finger on the screen. After a while, she locked the phone and placed it on her nightstand. She said in a flat voice that she hoped I would not bring up Jace in front of people, because she did not want to feel embarrassed by my insecurity. I answered that I had no wish to embarrass her, that I just wanted clarity. She did not reply. I reached over and switched off my lamp. The room sank into darkness. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then, on the other side of the bed, Tessa picked up her phone again. The small glow returned, lighting the edge of her shoulder. I lay still, facing the ceiling. On my nightstand, my own phone vibrated softly against the wood. The screen lit up just long enough to show a missed call from an unknown number and a small text preview that disappeared before I could read it, while I heard the quiet click of the bedroom door as Tessa stood and stepped into the hallway. In the morning, I woke up with that small missed call still in my mind. The number showed as unknown, but the timing made it feel less random. Tessa moved around the kitchen, making coffee, answering messages with one hand. She acted as if the night before had not happened. She told me she needed to meet a client later and might be home late. She did not mention Jace by name, but I heard the gap where his name lived. I brushed my teeth, helped Liv with her shoes, and tried to keep my voice light as I asked about her day at school. She talked about art class and a classmate's new backpack. Normal things that made me cling to the idea that some parts of life were still simple. At work, the open plan office felt louder than usual. People tapped keyboards, phones rang, chairs rolled back from desks. I tried to sink into the safety of tasks, tickets, and network issues. With machines, problems had causes. You press a key, something happens. With people, the cause and effect blurred. Around mid-morning, I went to the small corner where the office kept a coffee machine. 2 coworkers stood there already, talking and scrolling on a phone. One of them noticed me and turned the screen slightly, showing a photo for a moment before the angle changed. It was Tessa's social media page. The post showed an old picture of her and Jace, younger, closer, the kind of image that looked more like a movie still than real life. The caption talked about how some stories never really end, they just change shape. Underneath, comments from friends, including Chloe, said they had always been the real couple, and that some love was too big to forget. My coworker made a joke about how intense Tessa's past love life seemed, and asked if I was not nervous marrying someone with such a history. I said people had lives before marriage, and that I respected that. I smiled with my mouth, but not with my eyes. Then I filled my mug and went back to my desk. I opened a support ticket and pretended to focus, fingers moving in the familiar rhythm of typing. Under the desk, I slid my phone from my pocket and found the post. The comments were still coming. Chloe had added another one saying that Tessa was brave for staying connected to people who mattered, even when others did not understand. I silently took screenshots, scrolling slowly to capture the whole thread. I sent the images to my personal email, then locked my phone and placed it face down. Near lunchtime, an email arrived from my manager asking if I could stop by for a quick chat with HR. It said there was nothing urgent, just a check-in. My stomach tightened. I walked to the HR room, a small office with neutral-colored walls and a window that looked out on the parking lot. The HR representative, a woman named Irina, asked how I was managing. She said some colleagues had noticed I seemed distracted and quieter than usual. She also mentioned that there had been a moment at the main entrance the previous week when voices were raised. She wondered if everything at home was okay. I remembered the day she meant. Tessa had come to pick me up with Liv and, to my surprise, Jace. She had not told me he would be there. When I hesitated at the sight of him by the entrance, she told me I was making it weird and that it was just a ride. My father would have called that a small scene, but to strangers it might have looked like something else. In the HR room, I kept my voice calm. I told Irina that my family could be loud, but there was no danger. I said I did not bring personal conflict into the workplace and that my tasks were being completed. I apologized if anyone felt uncomfortable seeing a tense conversation outside. She nodded, took a few notes, and reminded me that the company offered support if I needed to talk to someone. I thanked her and left, feeling like my private life had stepped into a file somewhere on the office server. Back at my desk, I opened an internal system window to make it look like I was dealing with a ticket. Then I opened my email and downloaded the screenshots I had sent earlier. When I got home later, they would go into Archive A and Archive B. For now, they sat in my downloads folder like quiet stones. A small notification from the company's cloud service popped up at the corner of my screen when the system backed up recent files. Seeing the words file uploaded successfully calmed me more than any human reassurance had done in weeks. On my break, I walked to a small cafe near the office to breathe. When I stepped inside, I felt my chest freeze for a second. At a corner table, Tessa sat with Jace. They were leaning in, heads close, coffee cups between them. Tessa's face was animated, her hands moving as she talked. Jace looked relaxed, like someone completely at home in that scene. On the chair next to Tessa's bag, I recognized Liv's favorite scarf, the one with small stars. I realized she must have been there earlier or would be there soon. Tessa looked up and saw me at the counter. Her expression changed, just for a second, from open to guarded. She lifted her hand in a small wave that could be seen as casual. I nodded back, ordered a drink, and left before my name was called. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk with the cup cooling in my hand, the sound of traffic filling the space where words could have been. After work, I stopped at the supermarket to pick up milk and bread. At the checkout, a neighbor from our building got in line behind me. She started talking about the weather, then shifted to say she had seen Tessa earlier in the week with a man and Liv near the park cafe. She said she had assumed it was a relative because they looked like a happy little group. She added that Liv seemed to adore him. She smiled as she said this, clearly believing she was sharing something positive. I forced a small smile and said Tessa had many friends and family who cared about our daughter. Inside, the words scraped against something that no longer felt vague but still lacked a name. When I got home, Liv ran to me, arms up for a hug. She told me that Jace had guessed her favorite juice at lunch at the cafe. She said he knew it without asking. She sounded proud of his attention. I hugged her and said it sounded like he paid attention when she talked. Tessa watched us from the hallway with folded arms, her expression unreadable. Later that evening, after Liv had showered and settled with a book, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. Tessa stayed in the living room, scrolling through her phone and reacting to posts I could not see. I opened the spreadsheet again and added today's date and a short note. Seen at cafe with Jay, scarf on chair, HR check-in about entrance, neighbor comment. Then I opened Archive A and placed the screenshots of the throwback post inside a new folder labeled with the month. I copied the same folder into Archive B. For a moment, I watched the progress bar move, a thin blue line filling from one end to the other, as if I were watching my own patience measured in pixels. Before closing the laptop, I opened my phone calendar. Liv's birthday was marked with a bright icon. I scrolled forward to the red circle I had drawn. With slow fingers, I tapped that date and created a small event. I typed meeting, personal, Oakwood, 11:30 a.m. into the title line. I did not add more details. I set the reminder to silent, so it would only show on the screen without sound. Then I closed the app and sat back. The room smelled lightly of coffee and cleaning spray. The binder labeled household on the shelf looked the same from the outside, but I knew what it held now. In the bedroom that night, Tessa lay scrolling through party ideas on her phone. She told me that Nina had confirmed the restaurant booking, that the long table and decorations were going to look perfect in photos. She added that she wanted Liv to have a party people talked about. I said that what mattered most was that our daughter felt safe and loved. Tessa sighed and said I was always serious. She reminded me again not to make a scene if certain people were invited, because she did not want to feel embarrassed by me. I turned off my lamp, leaving only the faint glow of her screen. I stared at the ceiling until my eyes hurt. Just as I felt myself slipping toward sleep, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up. A new notification sat on the lock screen from the family group chat. Nina had sent a message saying Liv's birthday party booking was confirmed at the family restaurant she loved. Underneath, she wrote that Tessa could invite whoever she wanted, the more the merrier, and she could not wait to see all the photos. As I watched, the 3 small dots appeared next to Tessa's name, showing that she was already typing her answer. The day of Liv's party started with her bursting into our room before the alarm, already in the shirt with tiny stars she had chosen days ago. She climbed onto the bed between us and asked if it was time to go yet. I told her we still had hours and that even birthday girls had to eat breakfast. She grinned and then launched into a long list of everything she was excited about, from the balloons Nina had promised to the cake with her favorite cartoon character. Tessa filmed a short video of her talking, adding a bright filter before posting it. I watched from the doorway, half smiling, half wondering who else would be watching that video with us. The morning passed in a rush of small tasks. Tessa checked decorations, texted with Nina, and posted reminders about the party on her stories. I ironed Liv's dress and laid out her shoes. When I asked Tessa who was coming, she listed family, some friends from school, and a few people from her work. She did not say Jace's name. The omission felt louder than if she had shouted it. I swallowed my questions because I did not want to start a fight before a children's party. By early afternoon, we drove to the restaurant, a place with bright walls, plastic chairs, and a play area that smelled of fries and sugar. Balloons were already tied to the backs of chairs when we walked in. Nina stood near the long table, giving instructions to a staff member. She waved when she saw us and came over with her phone already in her hand, recording Liv's entrance. Liv loved it. She ran down the line of chairs as Nina filmed, laughing and shouting greetings at cousins and classmates. I followed more slowly, carrying the gift bags. Then I saw him. Jace stood near the far end of the table, busy tying a balloon to a chair. He wore a casual shirt and jeans, like any other guest. He turned at the sound of Liv's voice, and his face lit up with an ease that made my chest feel hollow. Liv ran straight to him and hugged his waist as if she had known he would be there. He lifted her slightly off the ground and spun her once, careful not to let her hit the chair. I looked at Tessa. She met my eyes, then quickly looked away. She walked over to Jace and Liv, kissed Liv's head, and said to me that she had invited a few extra people because Nina had said it was fine. She called it a surprise. I smiled tightly and said it was nice that so many people wanted to celebrate our daughter. My voice sounded almost normal. Inside, something heavy shifted. The restaurant filled, chairs scraped, children yelled, music played from a speaker in the corner. Nina moved around with her phone, capturing candid moments for later. I noticed how often Jace ended up in the frame near Liv. He stood behind her when she decorated cupcakes, guiding her hand when she squeezed too much frosting. He sat beside her while she drew on a placemat, guessing which color she would choose next before she reached for it. He was right every time. Tessa watched them with a smile, arms folded in a relaxed pose. It looked like a picture from someone else's life. During a game Nina organized, she called for all the important adults in Liv's life to help. Rowan to one side, Jace to the other, she joked, as if assigning teams. The children laughed, unaware of the weight of the words. Liv stood between us, holding one of each of our hands. Nina filmed as we helped her jump over a row of small cones. Someone behind us commented loudly that Liv had Jace's eyes, then laughed as if it were a harmless observation. The sound went straight through me. I kept my smile in place for Liv. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around the long table. Nina climbed on a low step to get a better angle. Tessa stood behind Liv, hands on her shoulders. I stood on one side, Jace stood on the other, close enough that our elbows nearly touched. The cake was placed in front of Liv, decorated exactly how she had described weeks before. Jace leaned down and whispered something in her ear. She laughed and said he was right, that it was her favorite flavor. Again he had known without asking. As the candles burned, people started chanting for her to make a wish. Phones came out. Nina's camera focused on the 3 of us around the cake. Someone joked that Liv was the luckiest child in the world with 2 dads there. A few people laughed, some with surprise. I felt my jaw tighten but did not move. Liv closed her eyes, made her wish, and blew out the candles. The room cheered. Jace lifted her and spun her again while Tessa clapped. I clapped too, hands working on automatic. After the main rush of the party, small groups formed. Children ran to the play area. Adults sat with plates of food, talking and scrolling through their phones. At one point, I found myself alone near the drinks table, while Jace sat on the floor near the play area, helping Liv build a tower with plastic blocks. He told her exactly how many blocks would make it fall, and when she tested his guess, he was right again. A cousin walked by, glanced at them, and said to me that it was crazy how much they looked alike. He added that he had assumed Jace was a relative until someone told him he was just a friend. I shrugged and said faces did strange things sometimes. I tried to stay present for Liv. I refilled her cup, helped her pick bits of frosting from the table, answered her rapid questions about her gifts. But every time I looked up, Jace was there, already kneeling beside her, already knowing which toy she wanted to open next. Tessa floated between groups, laughing, touching people's shoulders, checking Nina's videos, occasionally glancing at me with a look that warned me not to start anything. Near the end of the party, Nina announced she was doing goodbye interviews for her video. She recorded short clips of people wishing Liv a happy birthday. When it was my turn, I stood behind Liv with a hand on her shoulder and said simple words about loving her and being proud. Then she ran to Jace, who still had a balloon string wrapped around his wrist. He scooped her up without asking and told Nina he was glad to be there for her special day. The phrase hung in the air as Nina's phone captured it. When it was finally time to leave, I helped carry the gifts to the car. Jace offered to help, but I said we had it. Tessa hugged him goodbye in the parking lot, saying they would talk later. Liv waved at him from her booster seat. On the drive home, she chattered about how Jace had guessed her favorite cake flavor and her favorite game without needing hints. She said he must know her very well. I kept my eyes on the road and told her that what mattered most was that she had fun. At home, after we unpacked the gifts and Liv collapsed on the couch with a new toy, I told Tessa I needed some air. She rolled her eyes and said she hoped I would not ruin the night by starting another argument about a guest at a child's party. I answered that I would not argue. I would just take a short walk. I went down to the parking garage and sat in the driver's seat with the door closed. The air was cool and smelled of dust and oil. I took out my phone and opened the voice recorder. In a low, steady tone, I described the party. Who was there, how often Jace stood beside Liv, the jokes about two dads, the comments about how much they looked alike, the way he finished her sentences. I spoke as if I were recording a technical report at work, listing events without adjectives. When I finished, I saved the file with the date and one word, statement. Back upstairs, after Liv went to bed, I sat on the edge of my side of the mattress with my laptop. Tessa scrolled through her phone next to me, watching clips from Nina's feed. I opened my email, downloaded the party videos Nina had sent to the group chat, and saved them into Archive A, then copied them into Archive B. The smell of printer toner from earlier in the week still seemed to linger in the room, even though the printer sat silent in the corner. It too. As I closed the folders, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A notification slid across the top of the screen from Chloe's account. She had posted a still image from one of the videos. Liv standing between Jace and me at the cake, both of us smiling down at her. Her caption read, "When your sister's ex is more of a dad than her husband," followed by a small teasing emoji. While I stared at those words, footsteps paused outside our bedroom door, and the handle moved just slightly, as if someone was deciding whether or not to come in. 2 days after the party, Tessa's mother called and asked if we could come over for dinner. Her voice sounded too bright, the way people sound when they are trying not to show they have already been crying. She said it had been too long since they saw Liv properly, and that she wanted a calm evening together. I agreed because saying no would only create another story about me. On the way there, Liv hummed songs from the party and asked if Nina had finished the video yet. Tessa said Nina was editing and that it would look amazing. She added that I should not start acting strange when we arrived, because her parents were tired of drama. Their living room was the same as always, the same photos and lamps, but the air felt different. Tessa's father sat in his usual chair with the television off. Her mother stood behind the couch, rubbing her hands together. Chloe was already there, sitting with one leg over the other, her phone in her hand. Liv ran to her grandmother, who hugged her tightly as if she might disappear. Tessa announced that we were all finally in one place, and that this was our chance to talk like adults. That sentence alone told me there would be more than dinner. We sat down. Liv was sent to the kitchen with a plate of snacks and a cartoon on a tablet. The moment she left the room, the nice tone dropped. Tessa's mother said she was worried about us, and that she had heard I was making things difficult over something that had already passed. She said she knew there had been some tension at the party, but that it was a celebration and people had been joking. Tessa's father added that I was focusing on the wrong things, that real fathers did not waste time being jealous. Tessa looked straight at me and said she felt attacked and humiliated by my reaction to Jace's presence. She said I had barely smiled in most of the photos and that I had killed the mood when everyone else was just having fun. She repeated that Jace had been invited because he cared about Liv and wanted to support her. She reminded me that she had been honest about their past, so there was no betrayal. According to her, my problem was not what happened, but the fact that I could not handle the idea that another man cared about our child. Chloe joined in, saying that from the outside it looked like I was trying to control who Tessa could see and who could be part of Liv's life. She said that if a man loved a child, he would welcome more love instead of blocking it. She mentioned her post with the photo of the cake and said it was just a joke, that only insecure people took jokes as attacks. She did not look at me when she said this. She looked at her phone screen as if she was already drafting her next story. I listened. I kept my hands still on my knees. When they finished, I spoke slowly. I said my concern was not that another adult cared about Liv, but that my wife's ex had begun to act like a second father without anyone asking me how that felt or what that might do to our child. I said hearing strangers at the restaurant call Jace her other dad while my own family laughed with them had hurt in a way I could not ignore. I reminded them that people had openly said Liv looked like Jace, and that these comments were not made in private, but in front of cameras and children. Tessa rolled her eyes and said I was exaggerating again, turning small comments into proof of some big conspiracy. Her father said men had always joked like that, and that I needed thicker skin. Her mother asked if I really wanted to tear apart Liv's world over a few careless remarks. Chloe said many families had complex structures, and that I was stuck in old ideas. They spoke as if I was the one who had introduced confusion into the room, not the person who had invited her ex into our daughter's birthday party without warning. I did not raise my voice. I said I wanted one thing: honesty. I said if there was something I did not know about the past or about Liv's beginnings, I needed to hear it now, not later, not from strangers, and not from comments under a social media picture. The room went quiet for a second. Tessa's mother's eyes flickered, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Tessa saw that and quickly stepped in, saying there was nothing to confess, that our daughter was ours, and that I was insulting her by suggesting anything else. She said she refused to defend herself against old paranoia and that my questions were crossing a line. After dinner, which no one really tasted, we drove home in near silence. Liv sat in the back seat with her new toys from her grandparents, humming softly. When we reached our building, she ran ahead into the lobby. Tessa walked past me, saying she was tired of being put on trial. She went straight to the bedroom and shut the door. I helped Liv change into pajamas and brush her teeth. Then she asked if we could go to the park the next day, just the two of us. The next afternoon we did. The park playground was busy with kids running and shouting, but the bench where we sat felt like an island. Liv climbed and slid for a while, then came back and pressed herself into my side. She asked again, in a more careful voice, why Jace knew so much about her. She asked how he could guess her favorite cake flavor, her favorite game, her favorite stuffed animal when he had not been around as much as I had. She said her friends at school had asked if he was her other dad because of how people talked at the party. I swallowed and told her that sometimes adults said things they should not, and made jokes that did not make sense. I told her family was not always about who people thought you looked like, but who showed up every day. I reminded her of the nights I stayed up when she was sick, the mornings we walked to school, the stories we read on the couch. She leaned against me and said she knew I did those things, but her voice stayed thoughtful, not satisfied. Later that week, I stood in the school pickup line watching parents come and go. One of the other parents struck up a conversation, mentioning the birthday party. They said it had looked online like a co-parenting situation and asked if Tessa and I were separated. I felt my stomach drop at the word. I said we were married and that Jace was just a friend. The parent looked surprised and said people had assumed something else based on the photos. They mentioned the caption about two dads and laughed awkwardly. I nodded and changed the subject to homework and upcoming school events. That evening at home, I sat at the kitchen table again with my laptop. The binder labeled household pressed lightly against my elbow. I opened the spreadsheet and wrote down the conversation with the school parent, the questions from Liv at the park, the meeting at Tessa's parents' house. Then I checked Archive A and Archive B, making sure the party videos and Chloe's post were saved in both. When I minimized the window, my desktop showed the two folders sitting side by side, small and ordinary. The red circle date on the wall calendar seemed closer than before. Before bed, I walked past Liv's room. Her door was half open. She lay on her side, holding the plush fox from Jace. The soft glow of a nightlight shaped like a star lit her face. I sat on the edge of her bed. She opened her eyes and asked in a small voice if I was mad at her for liking Jace. I told her I was not mad at her, that I could never be mad at her for loving people. I said my problem was with grown-ups who did not think about how their choices looked to a child. She said slowly that people at the party kept saying she looked like Jace, and that he had smiled when they did. Then she looked up at me with wide eyes and asked the question that had been sitting in the room for weeks. She asked why she looked so much like someone who was not her dad. After Liv asked why she looked so much like someone who was not her dad, something inside me stopped trying to make excuses. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her slowly that questions like that were not her fault. I said grown-ups sometimes hid things they were afraid to face themselves and that it was my job to make sure she was not left in confusion forever. I did not tell her any theories. I did not say Jace's name. I only promised that I would not lie to her, even if it took time to understand the truth. She listened, nodded once, and then wrapped her arms around my waist. I stayed there until her breathing evened out and the plush fox slipped from her hand onto the blanket. When I left her room, the hallway felt narrower. Tessa was in the living room, sitting on the couch with the television on and her phone in her hand. She asked if Liv had asked more weird questions. I said that Liv was picking up what adults were putting down, and that children could not be expected to ignore obvious things just because it made adults uncomfortable. Tessa rolled her eyes and said I was feeding Liv ideas with my serious tone, that if I acted normal, Liv would too. I did not argue. I told her I was too tired to fight and that I would be sleeping in the guest room for a while so everyone could have some space. She said that was proof I was abandoning the family over nothing, and that she would remember this when people asked what went wrong. I simply nodded and walked down the hall with my pillow in my arms. The guest room was smaller and plain, but when I closed the door, I felt something like relief. I put my phone on the nightstand, placed my pillow on the bed, and sat on the edge with my elbows on my knees. The house was quiet except for the low sound of the television in the other room. On the wall opposite the bed, there was a small bookcase. I moved a stack of old magazines and found space to slide in a plain white envelope I had been keeping in my work bag. It was empty for the moment, but just seeing it there, waiting, made my breath slow. It was a reminder that I did not have to accept confusion as a permanent state. The next day, instead of going straight from home to the office, I took a detour. I dropped Liv at school, waved as she ran inside, then drove to a co-working space I had seen near the city center. The building lobby smelled of coffee and printer toner. I rented a small meeting room with frosted glass walls and a simple table. When the door closed behind me, I opened my laptop and set it in the middle of the table like evidence in a quiet trial. Archive A and Archive B sat on the desktop side by side. I clicked open the first one. For the next hour, I moved slowly through everything I had collected without fully admitting it to myself. Screenshots of Tessa's posts, Chloe's jokes about two dads, the throwback picture of Tessa and Jace, Nina's videos from the party, my own voice memo from the parking garage. I checked dates and times, matching them with my spreadsheet notes. In another window, the spreadsheet waited, neat rows divided by months. I added short entries, nothing emotional or dramatic. Just facts. Who was there, what was said, who commented, how Liv reacted. Looking at the pattern over weeks instead of days, something in me stopped wondering if I was crazy and started accepting that the situation itself was not normal. When I was done reviewing, I plugged a small USB stick into the side of the laptop. The device showed up on the screen with a blank name. I opened it and copied the key folders from Archive A, the ones that showed behaviors and words instead of just my feelings. The progress bar crawled from left to right. When it finished, I ejected the USB and held it in my hand for a moment. It was small and plain, but it felt heavy. I slipped it into the white envelope and folded the flap inside without sealing it yet. I wrote only the current month and year on the front in small letters. No names, no labels. Before leaving the co-working room, I picked up my phone and opened the message thread labeled Follow-Up. The earlier messages were short and professional, from the day I had first asked about options for understanding paternity, and then backed away. I typed a new line saying I had organized the information they told me to keep and that I was ready to discuss next steps, especially those involving clarity for a child. I read the sentence twice, then I pressed send before I could talk myself out of it. A few minutes later, as I sat in the car in the parking garage beneath my office building, a reply arrived. It confirmed that they were available to meet and asked me to choose a day. At lunch, I sat alone in the hospital cafeteria where I sometimes grabbed food. The smell of reheated meals and coffee filled the room. Nurses and doctors moved around, speaking in low voices. I stared at my tray for a while, then took out my phone again. I scrolled back up through the follow-up thread and felt a strange calm settle in. For the first time in weeks, I was not just reacting to Tessa's choices or other people's jokes. I was making a choice of my own. I typed the date of the red circle on the calendar at home, along with a time, and sent it. Another message came back, confirming and reminding me that they would explain everything clearly. I put the phone down and ate slowly, aware that very soon I would be holding something I could not unsee. That evening, I made spaghetti for dinner while Liv sat at the table drawing. Tessa came home later than usual, smelling faintly of coffee and perfume. She walked straight to the sink, washed her hands, and then announced that she had taken Liv's photo album to show Jace some old pictures. She said he had laughed about how much she looked like him when she was a baby, like it was some kind of inside joke between them. I felt my pulse in my ears. I asked, still calmly, why he needed to see our child's baby photos. She said it was normal, that he cared, that I should be grateful there were men willing to love a child who was not theirs. I stared at her for a long moment, then replied that from my perspective, I could not be sure who was whose child anymore. Her face hardened. She said I was crossing a line and insulting her, that she would not stand there and listen to accusations about things long past. She told me that if I kept talking like this, I would break everything for Liv. I set my fork down and told her, in a low, steady voice, that I was done arguing. I said I would not throw insults, break things, or involve Liv in shouting matches. I told her I had heard enough, seen enough, and collected enough to understand that this was not about one party or one joke. I said I would handle things properly from now on, through the right channels, and that the next steps would not be taken in front of a television or at a restaurant table. She demanded to know what that meant. I said it meant I would stop begging for clarity and start acting like a parent whose first duty was to his child's future. I said she would find out soon enough, and that whatever happened, I would not speak badly about her to Liv. She laughed without humor and said I loved my routines and my fear too much to actually do anything. She went to the bedroom and shut the door loudly behind her. Liv watched from the hallway, eyes wide. I knelt and told her that grown-ups sometimes argued when they were scared, but she was not the cause. That night, in the guest room, I sat on the bed with the white envelope in my hands. The house was mostly dark, lit only by a small light over the stove in the kitchen. I stood, walked to the wall calendar, and looked at the red-circled date. Then I took my phone and created a new alarm for that morning. In the title line, I wrote Paper Drop, Central Lab, 9:20 a.m. When I pressed confirm, a new message appeared from the follow-up contact with a simple line saying, "Appointment confirmed." The quiet buzz of the phone in my hand felt like the sound of something finally beginning instead of ending. The lab results arrived in a plain envelope, stamped with my name and Liv's. I opened it in the courthouse lobby with my hands steady and my heart quiet. The report said what everyone else had joked about for weeks. I was excluded as Liv's biological father, and Jace was indicated as the likely one. Tessa read over my shoulder, went pale, and said the test had to be wrong. Jace cursed under his breath and stepped back like the floor had cracked. I did not shout. I walked to the counter, confirmed my identity, and watched the clerk stamp my petition and parenting schedule, now tied to the report in my hand. Service would be handled for me. Outside, on the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with a new calendar reminder titled New Arrangement, 6 p.m. I stood there in the air, knowing there was no going back.